Hey everyone, Scott here. Well, I'm back at her, episode 5 of the long-term space program. This episode we're going to see some new vehicles. I've got lots to do, and at the end of it I'm actually going to do a little SSTO tutorial for everyone here that I'm going to roll into the video. Anyways, getting started here, you remember the rig is at the space station. I still have a docking collar for the moon orbiting the planet that needs to be picked up and taken out there. So with the new crew in hand, the rig is going to de-dock from the Kerbal station. We're going to go pick up the docking collar for the moon, haul her out there, and assemble it. Now, this is going to be pretty standard stuff as far as maneuvering goes. I just need to pick it. And again, I'm going to use the MechJab mod just to kind of speed up the process. I can do a lot of this stuff myself. It just tends to make things a lot faster for me. Alrighty, skipping ahead for a bit. Found it. Now I'm gonna grab the end of it, and I'm actually gonna use the engine that's still attached to it to help push it out to the moon. Reason for that is it's quicker. There's really no other reason to do it. There's more than enough delta V in this vehicle to carry the docking collar out to the moon without it, but it just, like I said, speeds up the process. And when I use the tug for the great big gas can that you see me hook up last episode, it's very slow to pull out to the moon, simply because it's got low thrust and a lot of mass. In any case, we'll just kind of staying focused here. So I'm going to come in on the end, just coming in. Again, I'm doing a lot of these maneuvers on the night side, so I'm glad I put a lot of lights on my stuff. Using the mod from Navyfish, the docking alignment, just simplifies things so nicely here. By the end of this video, though, I'm going to show you a couple more vehicles I have designed. I haven't really launched anything in the last episode because I just had so many missions and maneuvers I had to do in order to get everything ready for the future. I don't really know what to say. The long-term space program is going to be just that. I'm going to have a lot of little steps that I have to do in order to get the bigger stuff done, which is what everybody really kind of wants to see is the end result, right? So I'll try to keep these videos as fast as I can, try to keep them going at a fairly rate. Try to show you something new every time. I may not get to that every episode, but I'll do what I can. So we're just coming in, finishing off the last little bits of the maneuver here. We'll dock in a second, and then I'm going to be doing some maneuver noting. And coming in, connected. Nice. Now I'm just going to pull this sucker out. I'm going to just check my fuel reserves here. And set up a maneuver node out to the moon. Now, there it is, right up in the top there. Now, if most of you guys have ever played Kerbal Space Program, but for those of you that haven't, in order to get out to the moon, one of the best tricks or best visual cues that I've been able to determine is whenever you see the moon coming over the horizon when you're orbiting Kerbal, you pretty much have to start burning to it. So that's why I set my maneuver node that's kind of on an axis with the moon. And you can see it's pretty good at picking a location, and then I get kind of finicky about trying to come in at just the right angles or the delta, or to be kind of a miser with delta V, because after all, that's pretty much what gets you anywhere. Nothing worse in this game than getting to where you got to go without enough delta V to finish it. That just blows. Alright, so now we're going to switch over to the tug. And here's the tug. That's got that big can of gas in the butt, and Jebediah is at the helm. He's the Kerbal for the job. Again, I'm just setting up maneuver nodes because I'm going to fly both these suckers out to the moon at approximately the same time. So they're both going to be burning relatively close to each other. So just finalizing my maneuver node here, setting the alarm clock. As you can see, I've got 2 maneuvers to do within about a few minutes of each other, so skipping ahead a little. I'm going to start with this big can of gas. Now, this is going to be slow. Look, seriously. It is such a heavy vehicle to move around, and I'm so grateful that in the last KSP they got those senior docking ports on there, because doing it with the smaller ones would be even worse. But if you watch it as I'm rotating it around, it's wiggling, it's bouncing around. That's probably because I don't have any RCS control on the back. Now, I know some of you said, well, you just ditched the engine on the end of it from the last episode, and I'm like, I was thinking about that after I did it, and I was like, yeah, I probably could have used that. Ditched it at the moon instead. Oh well, you live, you learn, right? Well, I'll eventually get this thing straightened out, pointed toward prograde, and get it set up to transfer out to the moon. It's going to be painfully slow. I mean, it was like moving the probes around. It's just low thrust, heavy weight, low thrust to weight ratio. It's just going to take a while. That's really all there is to it. Setting up my maneuver node here, just trying to come in with a nice efficient amount of delta V. I don't want to, again, waste it even though it's a giant can of fuel. You don't want to be too inefficient because it doesn't last forever. And again with the noting. And I think I noticed here I made a little mistake. When I docked with it, I was controlling it from the rear port, and I never switched that back, which kind of made me realize my mistake after fact, but I'll just cut ahead here to when we actually start burning. I did move, did eventually get it sorted out. And we're off here. Now, if you're looking in the corner there by my nav ball, you can see, in order to translate this entire can of fuel, it's going to take me about a 10-minute burn. If you watch my periapsis, it's going down because I'm basically thrusting toward the planet. Now, if you're familiar with orbital operations, you might have heard the term the Oberth effect. That's great and all. Basically what that means is you actually gain more energy by transferring from a low orbit. However, that doesn't always work perfectly when you're actually starting to drag through the atmosphere. So I had to do 2 rotations around the planet in order to actually get enough delta V or get enough thrust out of those engines to transfer the tank back to the moon. It gets there, trust me, you'll see it soon enough. Now, to the docking collar here, the truck on it, this one's going to head out. At some point here, I ended up getting a little bit of a glitch and my Kerbal Engineer stopped working. But it's not too bad. I mean, you can still fly it with all the controls that just come in the stock vanilla Kerbal Space Program, that's fine. I'm taking advantage of the extra engine on it. Like I said, the first tank I ditched the engine when I realized I could have used it, but this time I didn't. Take advantage of the extra thrust, get it out there a little quicker, just so that I'm not so, sitting waiting for 2 complete revolutions around the planet just to get it out to the moon. Alright, it's actually nice when you're doing orbital operations to see the apoapsy move. When I start doing transfers out to more distant bodies, again it gets painfully slow because you either have to use high efficient low thrust engines like the nuclear ones, or just basically accept the fact you're going to be burning a lot of delta V with bigger engines and ditching them or trying to squeeze as much out of there and just having to carry more than you normally would. Scott Manley did a video here not too long ago where he transfers out to Eve with a very large vehicle using only 2 nuclear engines, which turns out to be incredibly efficient, but again, I think he did a whole bunch of revolutions around Kerbin before he was able to get enough velocity to actually break out of the sphere of influence. If anyone's interested, I'll put a link to that video in my comments here. He's got a pretty good series. It also tie in some tutorials as well with his show, which is really great for some newbies because I love these challenging games and I love the building games and I love, just the difficulty of these games, but when you're trying to learn that learning curve and it's incredibly steep, it tends to turn some people off. So it's great that this community has a lot of people that are willing to help with tutorials and things of that nature, and I'll try to squeeze a few in if anyone requests them. Feel free to ask me. And we're off to the moon, where we go to next. Well, back to this big old can in space. The ship's got a big butt. I like big butt. Nah, you can finish the rest. Anyway, this is going to be coming around for its second approach on the periaps, so I can start burning again to get the delta V I need to get out into a lunar encounter. It worked out okay because that way this will be behind the docking collar a little bit, so I'm not having to deal with too many sphere of influence changes or maneuvers too close to each other. I got a little wiggle room. When you're dealing with long burns, you tend not to want to have to stack maneuvers too close together, just in case you miss one, because I mean timing is a great deal around here. Now I jumped ahead just a little bit because again, dealing with a lot of tedium burns where I just basically burn, walk away, go have a drink, use the washroom, come back, and I'm still not done, that kind of thing, right? So I'll try to keep it as interesting as I can here, but I think I got pretty close to finishing my burn, or I had to move a little closer, otherwise I was going to end up dragging through the atmosphere again. You don't want that when you're trying to break out, because there's a technique in this game called aerobraking, which you can actually use a planet's atmosphere to slow you down, and certain planets are actually great for this. Eve has got a nice thick atmosphere. Kerbin's got a thick atmosphere, although it's lighter than Eve. Joule's got an incredibly dense atmosphere, so you can use that. And basically what that aerobraking technique is you come in just so that the just enough so that the atmosphere starts to drag against your vehicle. It starts to actually exert force against it, therefore bleeding off excess energy. Now, braking height and distance is going to be dependent upon where you're, like which planet's atmosphere. It's going to be specific to each planet, because each planet that has an atmosphere to begin with is going to have a different amount of pressure to deal with. There's a funny story where I was playing a game in KSP long before I started doing this. And I sent a vehicle out to Joule, and I figured, I was coming in pretty hot. I was doing like 3,000 plus meters a second, and I needed to bleed it off quickly. So I came in and set up my periaps to be about 85 or so clicks off the surface of Joule, thinking that'd be, fine. Well, Joule sucked it in. I didn't even get halfway through my aerobrake before I was heading straight to the ground, and there was no way I could recover, and it ended up dying spectacularly. Joule's got one hell of a entry burn, and it was, I watched it all the way down, because I was disappointed to lose the vehicle, but it was fun to watch, I'll give it that. So now we're done with this maneuver, heading to the next vehicle. Now this is my space truck. This is the Lunar truck. It uses a lot of parts from the TT Modular Wheels mod and a few other pieces, and it's going to be a go-between landed shuttlecraft and my refining station on the Moon. Now, when you're dealing with loads like this that are asymmetrical, the wheels being on the bottom and the docking port being on the top, you have to be really careful about balance. If you unbalance your vehicle, it can be very difficult to get out of the atmosphere. Once you're out of atmo, that's not so bad, but when you're actually building it, you got to be careful. Now, I actually lucked out here and didn't have too many problems with it wanting to get squirrely on me, even with the fact that I had no RCS on the top portion of the vehicle, using air breathers to push it up, because it's not that heavy a vehicle, and I'm also using the gas tank that is on the truck to feed the main booster stage. Now once it gets out into atmo, gets out of atmo, excuse me, I'm gonna have to send it to the Moon. Now I'm basically only got enough delta V in the booster stage here to get it out of atmo, and then it's pretty much empty. I'll get a circular orbit and leave it there. Basically going to have a truck floating in space. The next vehicle that's going to come up after this one is going to be my Lunar Hauler, and this is the vehicle that I designed to land on the Moon and ferry fuel up to the space station. It's going to connect with the gas truck here, and it's going to latch onto it and push it out to the Moon. It should have enough delta V with the launch to get it out there, and without any issue. And once I get the truck there, then in order to balance the truck again to make sure that it lands safely or it doesn't go all squirrely on me when I'm trying to bring it down with the sky crane, I have to fill the truck full of gas again. Just because without the way the game calculates mass is that when you're building your vehicle, your center of mass is shown when your vehicle is completely full. As you burn that fuel, the center of mass will shift. Now, with a full vehicle, i.e. that top docking port, the senior docking port on the top of it, is right over the center of mass, so it shouldn't be too difficult to drop. But if it's empty, especially if there's stuff in the monopropellant tank on the tail of it, it will become off balance and be a real nightmare to land, if it's even possible without flipping the vehicle. Again, just concerns you've got to be careful with when designing your vehicles. So we're pretty much up. I only have about a little bit of fuel here to circularize. I decided to burn some RCS off, because if I can drain a bunch of that stuff out, I can get a little bit higher apoaps, or start dealing with my periaps, getting it up as well without actually doing it. Plus, the monopropellant is being used mostly out of the truck, so it's lightening the truck too. And again, less mass means more delta V for the same fuel. So here we go with the circularization, getting close to it. Not having too many issues. Again, I put some canards on my launch stage here because I was afraid that with the vehicle being off kilter, not quite center, I was concerned that coming up through atmo I might need a little bit of additional control. So it turns out there's a little bit of monoprop in there, and I decided to leave it, and we have the stage going back. On hindsight, I probably should have saved a little bit of that rocket fuel and just put it back into the truck, but yeah, stuff happens. You forget. Things happen. And burning back. There, we got a periapsis that's going back, and now we've got a helpless floating truck in space. Boy, look at those Kerbals having fun, aren't they? The flying truck in space. Does that remind you of any bad movies? Anyone? Anyway, I probably just dated myself. Next vehicle. This is the actual lunar lander. This one will land, get loaded with fuel, and then fly to space station. That's its only job in the world. Right after it carries the RV out to the moon. So I'm just waiting for the gas truck to come around so that when I launch, I can make a relatively close rendezvous with it without having to worry too much. Now, since this vehicle basically starts out as a full fuel can, I kind of needed to burn a bunch of that off, so I've got less of a boosting stage, and I use the bigger 2.5 meter cans to get it off. Eventually, the whole system burns down, and it'll drain everything except the little radial tanks on the outside. Now, those are using parts from KW Rocketry. That's one of their smaller engines. It's an efficient engine that generates enough thrust to get this vehicle off the moon's surface with the moon's gravity, and it would work on Mimas as well and other low gravity bodies, but you could never land this thing on anything denser than that. And if its only job is to work on the moon and Mimas, it's fine. Nice little efficient engines. They're actually designed for satellites, but they'll actually work fairly well for this condition as well. Yeah, those little engines, I quickly did some calculations, and they're twice the thrust of a nuclear Minerva engine, but half the efficiency. So in truth, they're probably, much more ideal for this situation. So there they go. Now I've got all four going just to get my last little boosting out of here, or last little bit of push out of the atmosphere. Again, lightening it a little bit. Now, those great big gray boxes on the side of it are actually landing legs from B9 Aerospace Pack. Just to give it a different look, I decided to try them out and see how they work. They actually come down and give it a nice wide base. Again, me building wide bases and lower center of mass tends to work well for landers. Alright, so just coming up here. Alright, so we're just getting up, pushing that apoapsy. I want to relatively low orbit, so between 75 and 80 kilometers, and then I've got to immediately start to do a turn to circularize. I want to get this thing around as using the least amount of delta V. Now, that would mean in most cases you'd want to transfer what fuel was in there back up into the main vehicle and dump the stage. But I couldn't really do that quickly in the time because you're working with a time budget here. I've only got about a minute and a bit to do this whole thing, and then I've got to get her circularized within that time frame where you start to really go back into the planet if you're not careful. You've got a little bit more than a minute, but in most cases that's approximately on average what I get the time I do my circularization. So what I'm doing with this one is watching it. As soon as that center stage the bottom stage has enough fuel to just fill the center stage, I switch it back in and then drop the rear stage and use its smaller engines to finish the circularization. You're going to see me use this technique a fair bit. I find that some of my vehicles tends to work a little bit better, but at the same time, it just depends too on the situation. I don't always do it. So we're getting up there, wait until I get to the apoapse. Now, because I burnt early and got going fairly quick at an orbital velocity already, nearly orbital velocity already, I could basically just wait for the apoapse again and then burn to get that last little bit of juice, because once you get into the positive side periapses, it's very, most of your energy is there to do a standard orbit. So I'm just eyeballing the ship, admiring my handiwork. Then we're gonna start burning here right about now. Now you can barely see it because these engines, they don't have very big thrust wakes on them, which is fine. It's hard to see. And there we go. I'm up 73. So now I've got a rendezvous with the truck. I think I let MechJeb handle that. Yeah, we're fairly close, so just let MechJeb do it again to speed things up moving forward. So now I've got to capture the truck here just to get her set up, and then we got to do a burn. Alright. Again, using the Navy Fish mod because it's very handy. I find it quite useful. So now we're just going to get lined up with the docking port. It turns out this vehicle was a little squirrelier than I expected to try to get the maneuvers working. I eventually get it sorted out, but when it's empty, at least my RCS tends to want to overcompensate, and I wasn't using fine controls. So we'll get her set up here. It won't take very long, and then I'm just going to skip ahead to when I actually dock with the truck. And again, because I wanted to make sure that my weight was balanced, I wanted to make sure it was rotated properly with the truck so that it was on a good axis. If you've ever tried to carry a heavy load that didn't quite equalize out, you'd start to list to the left or right or up or down depending on the direction, and you'd have to like constantly compensate with RCS or something just to keep it going in the right direction or reduce thrust. It's just agitating. Balance, my friends, it's all important. It's important in life, it's important in Kerbal Space Program, it's important. Just balance everything. Make sure the scales are even. So, enjoy. Well, coming in for the last little bit of this, we're going to just hook onto the butt of the truck. Nice straight connection, and I came in a little fast, so I did a little bit of wiggling, but we got her. Now I got to figure out... I've only got about 1,300 delta V in this thing right now. To get out to the moon, it's between 8 and 900 depending upon your energy. So you got to be careful. That leaves me less than 500 or delta V to actually get there to circularization, and I'm actually a little bit worried about this. But I'm also eyeballing it too, and like the truck and the docking collar and the gas can are both getting close to a change too. So I'm just making sure my times line up and give myself some warning. So there, now we're just waiting. The Winnebago is going to get hauled out to the moon. I really shouldn't call it a Winnebago. It's a gas truck, not a Winnebago. But if anyone's ever watched that old movie from the 80s, Spaceballs, or Spaceballs the movie, you might catch the reference. Oh boy. Yeah, whatever. It was a movie. Enjoy it if you like it. It was Mel Brooks in his heyday. Alright, so we're just lining up and we're starting our burn. Again, these engines got a lot more thrust in them than the Minervas, so they tend to eat that delta V up quick, but you can see that truck just wiggling too. That will actually throw your trajectory off if you're not careful. Every little bit hurts. Like, I mean, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, so if you start wiggling, that will start to affect your trajectory. It may not seem like much, but when I get closer to dropping off the docking collar and the gas can, you're going to see what that means. Because when the gas can was wiggling, it actually comes in at a fairly different angle. Alright, so we have our encounter, and you can see the orbit just kind of pulsing there at the end, and that's simply due to the wiggle in the port. I should have put some quantum struts on it, but then I was thinking, this is the only time this truck will ever get pushed out there. Once it's on the moon, it's there to stay. Alright, now docking collar's coming in for a sphere of influence change. The last few seconds. And then I just have to set up a maneuver node. And I'm going to put this station on an equatorial orbit. Again, because it's just easier for the transfer to Kerbin. There's less energy lost. Just keeping in line with the long-term space program here. So the fuel that we pull out of the moon is going to be sitting there, and it's also going to be ferried back to Kerbin to refill the station there as needed. Once that's done, then we got our eye to the horizon. Now we're just coming in for the last bit here. Occasionally I get lag in my computer, so I tend to stop recording and then switch over to the next one as soon as they're done. Like so. There we go. Coming in, we're a little bit high. Again, that probably had to deal with imperfections in my burn. I was either a little high on the target or a little low, or there was some wiggle in the docking collar itself. So it comes in high. We'll have to do a corrective burn on that. Probably at the periaps. I'll come in and then I'll do a corrective burn to get it closer to the equator. Excuse me. And coming over to the next one, because the gas can's coming in next and it shouldn't take too long. Here we go. Now, This one I think I actually didn't want to rotate it around. I actually just started using the arrow spikes because they are higher efficiency, or excuse me, not higher efficiency, but they're higher thrust. And when I'm dealing with a can this big, it makes sense. So just coming in, and you're going to see just exactly how much difference that wiggle can create in larger vehicles. I love the concept of building huge motherships that take these grandiose missions, but in Kerbal Space Program, it's just sometimes that physics can be a real problem. So you can see why we don't do that. NASA doesn't do things like that because it's expensive. It's very hard to do. Now, as you can see here, I'm going to highlight it here in a moment, just how much of a difference the two vehicles came in at. One came in high, one came in low, just due to minor inaccuracies. There it is, minor inaccuracies in my flying. I'm not the best pilot ever, that's for sure. Anyway, that's that. So these two are going to just finish here, and then we're going to have some burns to take care of them when they get there. Now we get into my SSTO tutorial that I mentioned. I'm just going to talk about how to get an SSTO into orbit during this part while we watch me get this one. This is my SSTO plane called the Spear. Now, for anyone that's not aware, SSTO stands for Single Stage to Orbit. Basically a vehicle that doesn't drop any boosters or any parts along the way in order to get into orbit. Now, a lot of the parts on this plane come from the B9 Aerospace Pack. That's because the B9 Aerospace Pack a lot of its parts are designed for planes and specifically for space planes. For example, that center engine can switch between rocket and air breathing modes. In air breathing mode, which it is right now, it's very efficient. When in rocket mode, it's not so. It's not a great engine because it's also a lot heavier than most other engines, but it's still lighter than carrying two different kinds of engines. Also, like, for example, the B9 Aerospace, their intakes and those engines are all from B9. They're specifically designed to work with supersonic speeds and, lower atmospheres. So the first thing you want to do when you're getting an SSTO into space is climb. Off the runway, you basically want to get up to about 10 kilometers off the surface. You can do it relatively quick. You don't have to be that fast. I just go straight up because I'm trying to get this thing into orbit, right? And once you get up to about 10 kilometers, you have to start watching your air intake. If you look in the top right corner, you can start to see it counting down as we get closer. When you get to about 10 clicks, you want to level off. You want to keep your prograde vector, that little green icon on the nav ball, you want to keep the little winglets just above the horizon so you're still technically climbing. And now you want to collect as much horizontal speed as you can. If you look on the bottom left in the surface display of my Kerbal Engineer, that is, the horizontal speed is basically how fast you're traveling across the surface. I try to collect as much as you can, or you want to collect as much as you can, simply because that speed translates into energy to help you break out of orbit. Now, you're still in atmos, so you're dealing with drag, so you're not going to get going insanely fast like you would out in orbit, but you can still get going. I usually get to about a horizontal speed with this plane past 600 meters a second before I actually start to break out of atmo. Another thing you want to keep in mind is a technique called air hogging, where that basically means you have several air intakes. I've seen guys just stacking air intakes on their planes to take advantage of this. You don't need to go super crazy, but it does help. Basically what air hogging is if you've got a lot of air intakes, like on this plane I've got 4 on the pylons with the bare breathing engines, and then I got 4 more near the front by the cockpit. The ones near the cockpit are closed until I get to about the point where I need to open them. And you want to keep your airports that aren't being used closed because it reduces drag. Again, drag is the enemy. Now, once you get up to these higher, thinner atmospheres, you can actually open them where there's reduced drag and just take advantage of kicking your air breathing up again. And it helps you squeeze a little bit more time out of those air breathing engines. The other thing is, with this rocket system too that I've designed, the center stage can be switched to a rocket, and once you do that, the air that it was consuming gets freed up and gets distributed back to the other engines. So that's another way of, again, squeezing just a little bit more out of those air breathing engines. This plane's design, with its lift and balance, I was able to get it up to almost 20 clicks off the surface before I had to switch out of air breathing completely. Now, getting closer to 18 kilometers off the surface. This is where I start switching out engines. Somewhere around this point, because I'm doing this post commentary, I swap out to rocket mode here at, let's see here, right there. I switched out rocket mode in the center. As you can see, it freed up a little bit of air, but now the center's flying on rocket. I make a little goofball here and hit the wrong hotkey button and actually switch my center booster back to air breathing for a moment. Right here. And that, you know, kind of almost lost it. You can see the engine's changing colors because, you know, there are things. Anyway, I switch off everything at this point. I get all the air breathing done, and I also close all of my intake ports, every one of them. Again, to help reduce the drag. And now you want to start climbing again, because now now there's no atmosphere. It is not helping us. We want to get out of it. I'm up to about 60 kilometers now on the rocket engine. I also could have probably throttled back a little bit and taken advantage of my speed and saved a little bit of fuel. That was something I thought of after the fact, but that's another thing you can do, is taking advantage of that horizontal speed. You can usually throttle back a little bit right when you shut off your air breathers, so because you can just you'll have more than enough energy to get up there, so long as your vehicle has enough thrust. So now we're in space. I'm at a 75 kilometer orbit, just going closely to the apoapse so that I can start my circularization burn, having to open up solar panels because everything needs juice in this game. Everything needs electricity, otherwise you can't maneuver. And just admiring it. So we're getting a little close. Just doing a little bit of a burn here to get familiarized with it. Now we start circularizing a bit. And not a hell of a lot to talk about right now. Basically, it's just circularizing. You've seen it. If you've got enough fuel to do this stage and then do some maneuvers, you're pretty much success. SSTOs, as long as they do the job they're designed for, they're good. So I get her up to 66 kilometers, and my apoapse started to get away from me, so I stopped, and I'll wait till I get closer to the apoapse one more time to get that last little bit of energy I need to make a stable orbit. But if you look at the top corner, you can see I started with about 4,000 units of fuel and oxidizer, and I'm in space with 1,000 of each. I've only used 3/4 of my fuel to get out. This is why SSTOs are probably going to be the future of space travel, is because they're much cheaper and easier, but the technique to get them out into space is a little harder. I mean, the physics are there. It's not quite as cut and dry as things are in Kerbal Space Program. Kerbal Space Program is, of course, based on true Newtonian physics, but at the same time, it's not perfect. So I see a lot of those private companies these days are trying to get up into space with SSTO type vehicles or single drop vehicles or planes that drop other vehicles that go into space. There's lots of that stuff out in the net, so take a look. Just admiring Kerbin from the cockpit, and just getting her all lined up. I got to do my last little bit of a burn here just to get my periapse out of Atmo. Atmo on Kerbin starts at 70 kilometers, so this would be known as a degrading orbit or a decaying orbit. If I didn't fix it, slowly the plane would fall back down to Earth. And I'm using those little pods on the bottom because they just hold straight fuel, and when you're on liquid breathers you don't actually burn oxidizer. So I calculated I need about 500 liquid fuel just to get her out into space. Now, that was my last burn. We are out, we are safe, and I'm going to end this video with a badass shot of my SSTO against the sun. Oh, yeah. So until next time, see you in the verse. Have a good day and take care. This is Scott Cook signing off.